Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is the old masturbator, Scott Bradfield. We're here at the bathtub. The show's called Reading Great Books in the Bathtub. In case you're confusing me with one of those, I don't know, one of those other TV shows. I don't know what they do. I don't even know what they do on YouTube, so I don't know. I don't know. And I'm here tonight to talk today to salute everybody. We survived the Trump era. This is our Manhattan this evening. This is the second pandemic haircut edition. My haircut, that's the exact same haircut I had when I was 22 years old. Only I'm 65 years old. I have the body of a pandemic fatso. I have a big fatso with a 22-year-old haircut. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I wanted to. We went through a kind of a hectic period here at the bathtub where we just did constant talks about different books, I don't even remember what we talked about, just to get through the last days of the Trump empire and the fading American empire. And we were kind of trying to slow down and do some just normal talks and keep them brief because I talked too long. Today I wanted to talk about one of our themes. We have a theme show here, and that's called the so-and-so nay, so-and-so yay. So, for example, we did Norman Mailer no, Richard Yates yes, or something like that. I don't remember which ones we've done right now, but there's a kind of a negativity. It's the only negativity we really let into the bathtub, unless we're talking about Trump. We don't really like negativity here. Our theory is if you like somebody, we don't care if it's Stephen King or it's Norman Mailer or people we actually don't like to read here at the bathtub. But we think anything you read makes you happy. But every once in a while I feel I have to do a nay and yay. These are exactly like the ones that I do where we say, if you like, I don't know, Kurt Vonnegut, you might really like Richard Brautigan, sort of thing. We can do it. We can basically compare and contrast two ways here because that's all we know how to do at the bathtub when it comes to a compare-contrast essay. But today, I thought about it. I'm going to go with my first gut instinct, which is we're going to say today, I didn't get the board or anything, Douglas Adams, no, and Robert Sheckley, yes. Okay, you ready? Douglas Adams, no. Robert Sheckley, yes. I don't even have any Douglas Adams in the bathtub. I don't have any in his books in my house. And it's not, I don't even think, he may even actually be a really good writer. I totally respect everybody's love for Douglas Adams. So many people I meet, particularly students, tell me that what was your favorite book? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What's your favorite book? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I got 10 pages into Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I gave up. That's as far as I got. I saw the movie, and I saw it a couple times with my son. He liked it. And I tried listening to the radio show, the original radio show. I was bored to death. And it was a kind of whimsical, kind of clever, comic story, which many people enjoy, and I can totally understand why they enjoy it. But at the same time, I just found it really boring. And every time I listened to Douglas Adams or saw one of his books, I always thought, Robert Sheckley is 10 times better. We've talked about Robert Sheckley a little bit here at the bathtub, and I wanted to give a little bit more of a pitch about Robert Sheckley because I read him when I was about the same age most people listen to Douglas Adams. So this would be in the mid-60s when I was a kid and I became a science fiction buff for a while. And Robert Sheckley we talked about him in the past. He wrote lots of short stories. If you do not know Robert Sheckley, you really must go out and get some Robert Sheckley. These are some of the books I read as a kid, and I'm rereading them as I get older. Pilgrimage to Earth. Most of his best work is his short stories. His short stories are far and away his best work. He wrote hundreds of short stories for the science fiction magazines and some of the thriller and detective magazines and some of the Saturday Evening Post. He was in a lot of the places. He wrote lots of stories. They are sharp. They are smart. They are funny. They move really quick. And Douglas Adams has that similar kind of quickness about him and humor about him. But what I think Sheckley has is a much better sense of form. So these stories, they start off with a bang and they end with a bigger bang. And they always come together as a real story. They're always surprising, they're always different, and they're usually comedies about 50s American conformism and stupidity and American television. Basically none of this stuff is aged. It's basically just gotten stupider and it's almost caught up with the insanity of a good Robert Sheckley story. So this is a good book of stories of his. There's lots of them. This was my favorite as a kid, Notions Unlimited, partly because I just loved all those amazing old paperback jackets. I mean, but it's also a great book of stories. He did lots of stuff about, he basically wrote about reality TV long before Trump. He wrote about, in the 50s, he was writing about TV shows where people would try to kill each other to win $50 or something. I always say that The Running Man, the Stephen King, boring novel by Stephen King, is basically a Robert Sheckley 10-page story blown up to 300-400 pages. So anyway, that's a really good one. Pilgrims to Earth. I'm getting The People Trap. Really great book of stories. I remember loving this one. He was best known. One of his big successes was The 10th Victim. There was a kind of Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress based on one of his short stories. So again, it was a TV show where people murder each other, I think. I can't remember, but they took this one 10-page story by Sheckley, turned it into a movie, and Sheckley did the novelizing of the book. I can't really, I'm not going to even try to read a passage. When Sheckley starts a story, in the first paragraph you know exactly where you are, you know how incredibly crazy the world is, and you're heading forward. He never wastes time. There's almost no exposition in Sheckley. He just gets you zipping along. I wanted to, the other thing I wanted to say, and I only found this out the past 2 days when I was kind of nosing around and checking out Sheckley's life and all that stuff. He died in the early 2000s. He's one of the few writers I really would have loved to meet. He wrote a book called Dimension of Miracles. I can't remember it. I read it when I was 14 or 15, and it was kind of an intergalactic space romp. He does lots of space romps. And as I was researching it, I found somebody comparing this and saying that Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was quite like this book. I don't know. I cannot. I'm not going to get involved in that discussion, but it is one I remember pretty fondly. But God, look at that cover! Isn't that a cool cover? Even if the book wasn't any good, I would read it because of that cover. So there's a bunch of the stories. You can't really buy a Sheckley book which isn't good. I talked a bit about this a few weeks ago. The Robot Who Looked Like Me. I found this at my local bookshop. The Phoenix bookshop in San Luis Obispo before the pandemic. And it was a late Sheckley, 1980s. He was writing stories well into the 2000s. And it's filled with great stories. I mean, even his late career, a lot of writers, start to fall apart. It's a wonderful book of stories. And he writes the last 2 stories are so damn good. I almost want to tell you a little bit about them. One is called Is That What People Do? I had never read this story before. It's about 8 pages. And the premise is a guy buys a cheap pair of binoculars from the Army Navy store. And he goes to the window in New York or wherever he is. And he wants to spy on people, obviously. But he drops them and somehow they become magically imbued with the ability to show what people are really doing in these apartments. And they're always doing really weird things. I can't even describe them. Just really, they're not salacious or anything. They're just really odd things that this guy sees. And every Sheckley story comes to a conclusion which is perfect for that story. I never felt that way when I was. Adams was just like funny idea, funny idea, funny idea. Sheckley stories have a real sense of form. He is one of the great, fabulous short story writers. Easily one of the greatest American fabulists. And I would put him up there with John Collier and with, all the bests. And if you haven't read him, you have to read him. The final story is called Silversmith Wishes. And I don't think I'd read that before, but I loved it. The gimmick was that, it's the old deal with the devil, so the devil comes and grants you 3 wishes. Well, there's a guy at the beginning of the story, and some guy walks up and says, I'll give you 3 wishes. And he says, I got to think really carefully. No, don't worry about it. And he says, I want $1 million or something. And the guy doesn't have magic. He actually goes out and earns $1 million for him. He's really, the guy, he's not like a magic person, like in the Satan books, Satan stories, where the person just flips his fingers and gives you beautiful dancing girls. And then he says, I want 10 dancing girls. He goes out and gets dancing girls, but it takes him months sometimes to do it. And then after he gets to the 3rd wish, he says, I'm going to give you 3 more wishes. Just 3 more wishes. The story is like 8 pages. And it's just about these accumulating wishes this man makes, and he gets them all handled by this guy who's getting exhausted because he's actually going out in the world to find this stuff. I don't want to say more than that. It's a perfect story. Anyway, his short stories are all perfect. His novels are not so perfect, as most people can tell you. This past week, I read a book of his, which I'd never read, I'm pretty sure, The Status Civilization. Usually his novels tend to get, he really is brilliant at the shorter form and giving form to the story. The novels tend to be very clever, very funny, and they kind of run out of gas near the end. And I felt that was sort of true of The Status Civilization. But the first 2/3 of this are like 10 great science fiction novels that are funny. Within the first chapter, some guy is on his way to a planet where they send criminals. And as he gets there, he doesn't know who he is. His memory's been erased. He lands on the planet. He knows nothing what's going on. But he decides to go for a walk, and everyone says, "Oh, it's new arrival day. We can kill you." This is the first week, the first 5 pages of the story, and they try to kill him, and somebody helps him get a gun, and he kills. Anyway, the Status Civilization is a world full of gangsters, where you get higher in the ranks of gangsterdom by killing people. It's basically America 2021. So this guy eventually he goes from one outrageous situation to another, which he triumphs over, and it's just 100 pages of bliss. The guy Sheckley wrote beautifully, narratively, and it's funny, and it's about stuff too at the same time. And there's plot switches and everything's going. It kind of gets a little lost at the end. It's not as bad as some Sheckley novels where he goes back to Earth, and I don't want to say any more than that. But I really enjoyed The Status Civilization. Another beautiful cover. I don't know. Oh, Podwill. I don't know if I know who Podwill is. Anyway, I recognize the style. And I really enjoyed it. I haven't read this. I mentioned this Journey Beyond Tomorrow. I read this. I forgot it, I think. But the short stories, Robert Sheckley, if you like, you can take this episode 2 ways. If you like Douglas Adams, you have to try Sheckley. If you don't like Douglas Adams, that's where I'm at. You may well like Robert Sheckley. At least I think that's the theme for this week. Anyway, Robert Sheckley, he's bliss. He's narrative bliss. And if you haven't read him, you have to read him. Take care. Stay safe. Let's try to get through another 4 years or somebody and give old Joe a chance, and we'll see what happens. Stay safe.